and higher education faculty throughout the
Tonight we're blowing out the format. We're all debate, all hour. Quick reminder of how we do debates around here. No stopwatches, no opening or closing statements, no Robert's Rules of Order. We're going to have a conversation.
We've invited all candidates who have achieved at least 5% support in any independent statewide poll. That leaves us with tonight's trio. We've mixed up the order of introduction from our first debate. Tom Emmer is the Republican Party candidate. He's a state lawmaker. Tom Horner is the standard bearer of the Independence Party. He's a former business executive. Mark Dayton is the DFL candidate on the ballot. He's a former U.S. Senator. Gentlemen, good to see you again.
Thank you.
Well, Tom Horner, I'm going to start with you first. You all are near the end of a very long road, and a lot of stuff has been said over the past few months. Name one misguided, inaccurate, or totally ridiculous thing said during this campaign that you want to shed some light on tonight.
Well, I think the most ironic thing maybe that has been said is by the Republicans who accuse me of being too liberal and the Democrats who accuse me of being too conservative, and they both can't be right. So, I think it speaks to my position in the race, where I have captured the center ground and where I do speak to, I think, the broad middle.
Senator Dayton, one misguided, inaccurate, or kind of silly thing you've heard on the campaign trail over the past few months that you want to shed some light on?
Well, most recently that I'm going to raise taxes on middle-income taxpayers, and that's simply not true. According to the Minnesota Department of Revenue, my proposal applies only to less than the top 4% of Minnesota income earners. So to say otherwise is just totally wrong.
Okay, Tom Emmer?
Well, probably the most disturbing was that somebody asked if Jackie was my second wife because she looks too young to be my first wife. But aside from that, with my colleagues, I think the one thing is the misinformation that has been published and spoken by Senator Dayton about how what I would propose would raise property taxes, and giving some confusing statements to the public about what will happen if we try to get government to live within its means and start to grow jobs again.
What did you say?
League of Greater Minnesota City says your proposal will raise property taxes. The Minnesota Department of Revenue says for every dollar of local government aid you cut, you raise property taxes by 67 cents. That's why I have the endorsement of the Minnesota police and peace officers, the professional firefighters, because they believe your proposal will result in cutting the essential public services, public safety.
Well, and that's also false. The local government aid piece, we've talked about specifically reforming local government aid so that it actually goes to those essential services. Today, I don't think a lot of people realize, and Senator Dayton, you haven't been explaining this to folks, that out of the 800 plus cities that we have in this state, only 20 cities get over 50% of the local government aid dollars. Only 5 cities get almost 40%. And I'm the only one up here that's actually sat in a city council that's dealt with local government aid. It's got to be used for police and fire, essential services for communities that need that type of support. We proposed reforming it to do just that, Senator.
When you look at it on a per capita basis, those cities look in a very different light. But you were on a city council where you raised property taxes by 16%, and you said it was because of the reduction in state aid. So when you were at the local government level, you recognized that if somebody reduces the state aid, you have to raise the property tax levy.
And Cathy, this is a great discussion because that is the essence of the argument. And this is the problem, Senator. You've never experienced this, so you wouldn't realize that that's where the best decision is made, at the local level, the closest that you are to the people that are being asked to pay the bill. And when you say for every dollar that the state does not spend, it raises 67 cents at the local level, why wouldn't taxpayers want to save 33 cents of every dollar? It's got to be more efficient. It's got to be more responsible. That's what we're talking about.
Because you have to cut police and fire and other basic services.
Only if you don't have your priorities.
These guys keep having the arguments about the past, and there's the problem. How does a Governor Dayton, how does a Governor Emmer get anything done when they keep having these kinds of arguments about the past? We better be looking to the future. And I think that's why there is so much dissatisfaction with the kinds of campaigns that we've seen in Minnesota, with the kind of candidates that we've seen. I think this year Minnesotans are really saying it's time to break the gridlock, to move beyond, to have innovative solutions about the future.
Would property taxes go up in a Tom Horner administration?
No. In fact, in my budget, I've put in some property tax relief. I think particularly particularly in areas like agriculture. It's time to move from taxing on the speculative value of agriculture land to move to the productive value. And I've put in the kind of honest property tax relief that can help accomplish that.
There was a poll earlier this week. Half of those surveyed feel that there should be smaller government with fewer services. Now, Senator Dayton, we added it up, and it looks like you're endorsed by 9 public employee unions. Now, how on earth will you be able to go to those unions and say, you've got to downsize, you've got to innovate, that might cost some jobs? How independent are you going to be of those public employee unions to do some of the surgery that might be needed to be done on the budget?
Well, Eric, I think if people know anything about me after my 35 years of public service in Minnesota, it's I'm my own man. And I will make decisions based on what I believe is absolutely necessary for the state of Minnesota to provide the best possible services and what's best for the most people in Minnesota. That is absolutely always been my promise, seeking public office, and that is absolutely my commitment if I'm elected.
Would you agree that some reform of government is needed?
Oh,
that
very
you
much
can't
so.
live in the past, you got to move forward?
I have met with the management consultants in the private sector here in Minnesota who have worked with Republican and Democratic governors around the country, and they've achieved hundreds of millions of dollars of savings and improved administrative efficiencies, consolidating accounts payable and other functions of government. And they say there hasn't been any interest in the last 8 years here in Minnesota in those kinds of savings. So absolutely, I'll bring in people to look at those opportunities.
I mean, you've got to be consistent. Your budget says you're going to save all of this money by stopping the outsourcing of public services to the private sector. You and I were at a technology conference the other day talking to technology CEOs, and all you could talk about was how we really have to engage these private sector workers in taking on some of the public functions. You can't have it both ways. And that's been the problem, Senator, is that throughout this campaign, too many promises to too many special interest groups. For the two of you, too much unwillingness to stand up to the special interests, whether they're coming in with their millions of dollars in negative advertising and saying enough. This is about Minnesota. This is about our future. We better have a debate about that future, not about the past.
See, Tom Emmer, you have made a centerpiece of your campaign smaller government, and the state of Minnesota has about 55,000 workers. Should we have fewer state employees?
Well, I think ultimately you have to look at the services first that government's expected to provide. Both of these gentlemen talk about raising billions of dollars of new taxes because they make the argument, both, that we either have to raise billions of dollars of taxes or we got to cut services. I don't buy that. I think the public, I think the polling that you're seeing, they don't buy that. We've got to look at the services the government's supposed to provide. We've got to remove the duplication, the bloat, the excess, make sure that those services are being delivered in the most efficient manner, and then we got to get jobs growing.
Your running mate, Annette Meeks, wrote an interesting public policy paper several years ago and talking about competition in state services and talked a little bit about privatization. Would you privatize some state services?
I think you have to look at every option. We've come to a crossroads.
So you would privatize some services?
What I said was you have to look at every option. I don't think you commit to saying that we have to privatize everything in government. The one thing I will commit to is our state government should not be taking citizens' taxpayer dollars and then getting into business to compete with its private citizens. That should not happen, and it is happening. If there's something that a private citizen can do, government should not be doing that function.
Tom,
well, but I mean, with all due respect, I think that not only do you have to look at every opportunity, whether you privatize or not, but I think you also have to look at every function of government and where it's doing well. And so take an issue like broadband. I think it's critically important for Minnesota to have access to broadband. Now, we hope that in most communities, like the Twin Cities, that you can do it through the private sector. There are some communities like Monticello where they've done it as a private-public partnership. But I do think that there are going to be some communities around the state where it will take a public investment. I think we need to be open to that. If we want to open up Minnesota to world-class education, health care, economic development opportunities around the state, we better be open to the technology of the future. We better be open to innovation. We can't just keep having these same political debates over whether we put our stake in the ground and say we're just going to cut spending or we're just going to raise taxes on 4%. And everybody else under both scenarios gets a free ride. I don't buy it.
Well, I don't think middle-income taxpayers have had a free ride, Mr. Horner, in the last years. Their property taxes have gone up.
Senator, here's the problem. You've got too many Minnesotans not paying any income tax at all. And when you don't pay tax, you have no responsibility for cutting the cost of government.
Senator Dayton.
We need to connect people to the cost of government, and you do that by reform, by having a consumption tax.
As I was saying, you want to add the sales tax burden on to middle-income taxpayers. You want to extend the sales tax to clothing, to personal services like haircuts and car repairs. You don't want to raise taxes on the top income earners $1. You would rather put the burden, increase the burden on middle-income taxpayers.
Except
and
we
just have a fundamental disagreement. Well, it is if you extend the sales tax to clothing and to personal services. Of course, middle-income taxpayers are going to pay more in taxes.
Senator, why is it that every Democrat who has had a tax proposal has said we ought to go to a consumption tax? Senator Bach, a good northeastern Minnesota Democrat, chaired the tax committee this year, said we ought to go to a consumption tax. Senator Rest said we ought to go to a consumption tax. Why is it that almost every Democrat has rejected your plan and has said that we ought to do my plan?
Why isn't that? You won't answer my question. My question was.
I'll answer your question if you answer mine.
Mine is that they're not the DFL candidate for governor of Minnesota. That's my answer.
So let me ask my question again.
Let me ask my question again, please. Why are you unwilling to raise the income tax on the top income earners, who the Minnesota Department of Revenue says are paying less than the same percent of income in state and local taxes as everyone else, and instead add to the tax burden on middle income taxpayers with the sales tax?
Senator,
and the personal.
That's a great question. Have you looked at my proposal? Do you know that I am closing some of the deductions and loopholes for top earners, and that's very specific in my proposal. But what I do when I do it that way, we're not taxing the job creators. So what you have to answer is, how are you going to tell those people in Thief River Falls that DigiKey isn't going to add the hundreds of thousands of jobs, or the hundreds of jobs, because you want to add 30 to 40%?
When I met with DigiKey, what they wanted was a runway that could land a 757 airplane.
No,
the infrastructure was. I met with DigiKey, and we had different conversations. Evidently, I'm not disputing what you said, but they didn't raise my proposal, and this was just a couple of months ago. They want the infrastructure improvements to add 900 jobs. And once again, your theory is that we have to become like Mississippi. We can't raise taxes on the top income earners.
That's
ridiculous.
That's
what a low tax state philosophy is. You still haven't explained why you would raise taxes on middle income taxpayers.
Accusing me of raising billions of dollars of taxes, and you accuse me of going back to Mississippi. That's the same kind of nonsense that gets us into the gridlock. That gets us into the inability to move into the future.
Because you have a different view on taxes than either of these two.
I do, and you can call me Tom. It's the nicest thing anybody calls me, Mr. Horner. I don't agree with either one of you. I don't believe that now is the time, in the midst of the longest recession that we've experienced in this country and in the state since World War II, to just raise taxes. It doesn't matter if it's a consumption tax. You can talk about tax reform, but all you're doing is adding another revenue stream for a government that really is in dire need of structural reform. That's not reform. And by the way, the budget you put out has a $2.5 billion hole, even with the 20% you want to grow government in the next 2 years. So when you promise to maintain 85% of the spending and you promise to raise taxes, something isn't adding up. And Senator, you talk about taxing the rich, and I know that sounds good to some people because it sounds like somebody else is going to pay their way. It's the wrong answer at the wrong time. You're not taxing the rich. You're not taxing your wealth. You're taxing people's income, and it'll hammer every mom and pop small business in this state, what you're proposing. You've got $1 billion hole in the budget you've put out. You haven't been honest in telling people these are all the taxes I'm going to raise. You talk about cutting government. The reform that Senator Dayton's proposed is hiring up to 200 new tax auditors for the Minnesota Department of Revenue to go out and harass citizens even more to collect even more money. That's not reform.
People are evading paying taxes.
We've got to streamline government. We've got to make sure government delivers the services without growing at double-digit rates. It's not sustainable. It's not responsible. And we've got to start growing jobs.
Thank you. The Minnesota Department of Revenue says that my tax proposal would affect less than 8% of the businesses in Minnesota. And again, they're just paying taxes on the top income. You and you deny this, but you're not being candid, because, or at least you're disagreeing with the Minnesota Department of Revenue, who we've all agreed would be our arbiter. When you cut local government aids, when you cut school aids, as you would, then the property taxes are going to go up. That's what's happened under Governor Pawlenty. That's why property taxes in Minnesota have gone from $4 billion to $7 billion, and businesses pay 4 times more in property taxes than they pay in the corporate tax. You're going to have a much worse effect on particularly small businesses with your proposal than I would.
I do get to respond to this because Senator Dayton, while I have a lot of respect back for you. You keep saying that we're cutting schools. That's not true, and I'm the only one sitting up here that has kids in public schools right now. We have a commitment to our public schools. We're maintaining that and improving it, and we actually have reforms. And it should be interesting to people that Tom Dewar, the guy who actually is stopping all education reform right now in the state of Minnesota,
He's the president of Education Minnesota.
is your biggest supporter. So here's what I want to throw back, because it's really important that people understand. You're not being honest about your budget. You talk about the Department of Revenue, but you've sent 2 budgets to the Department of Revenue, and I commend you for that. Because when I put mine out, which is balanced and it's honest within what government's going to have in the next 2 years, 7 to 8% increase. You want it to grow 20%. You've sent 2 budgets now to the Department of Revenue. If I can finish, 2 budgets, and they don't balance.
Okay, Senator Dayton.
And you're not going to put another one.
It's just draconian.
That's not.
And I point out, as I did before, I have a son, Andrew, at the University of Minnesota Law School, and the last time I looked, that was a public institution. An excellent one, too.
I want to correct one statement, Senator, because it is the most disingenuous statement you make. When you say your tax proposal will only affect 8% of small businesses, true. How many jobs does it affect? 90% of the small business jobs in Minnesota. You're killing jobs. That's what you're doing. That's what your tax proposal does. 8% of businesses, but 90% of jobs. You got to stop that.
So the other 92% of businesses, where you're going to turn into tax collectors, because they're going to have to collect sales tax
as they
on
already
their
do,
sales.
Senator, as they already do.
Of course, you would expand the sales tax.
Barbers,
we'll continue to talk about this. We're going to take a quick break. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Tonight's debate, by the way, is done in partnership with the Star Tribune. And next door in Studio C, Mary Lahammer and Rachel Stassen-Berger have been interacting with viewers both online and in real life. So let's check in for just a minute.
Yeah, Kathy, some of the viewers here in Studio C with us have been watching the debate. We've been getting some giggles, some laughs, and some background on them. Interesting group here. Many undecided voters or voters who are just leaning one way and could be making up their mind while they're watching here. We've got a lot of Jesse Ventura voters here.
We do. And one of the interesting things about the room is they react to these debates just like we do. We heard Emmer say just a few short minutes ago, "Well, I have a lot of respect for you, Senator." The crowd in here knew that was not going to be a particularly respectful statement.
Yes.
There were some calls for Emmer to be more specific. They perceived that Dayton was doing most of the attacking. And even on Twitter, somebody said, well, how is a Governor Horner going to run the legislature if he's got no allies there?
An interesting note here, too, we mentioned a lot of folks in this room voted for Jesse Ventura. Several of them also voted for Tim Pawlenty, and a lot of them are on the fence right now. One person said they really don't feel like they can go towards Emmer. We've got another person saying Emmer's tax cuts are very appealing. We've got a solid Dayton person in the room, but several people that are, on the fence as they're watching. And back to Twitter, what else is interesting for you? What do you see on Facebook?
One of the interesting things from the room here is that so far, no minds made up. So candidates, you've got a bit of work to do.
And on Twitter, some of our comments, somebody felt like they were getting ready for the nearly 3 millionth debate. A little commentary about how many debates. Another gal, a real Minnesota comment, debates on Almanac make me so uncomfortable. The candidates are sitting right next to each other.
Ooh.
Yes, we like that about Almanac. I think our group likes that too. Yes, they're enjoying the interactivity and saying that they're attacking each other equally. That's been the summation in the room.
Right, and if you can't be here in the room with us, I'm sorry, but you can join us on Twitter. I'm at Rachel SB. Mary's at
M. Lahammer. So Twitter's really hopping. You can also jump on Facebook as well. Check us out.
Thank you.
Yep, back to you.
Thanks, you two. We'll be back to you a little bit later on in the program. I want to talk about the human services part of the budget. And it's supposed to go up $3 billion, Representative Emmer. And you're saying instead, under your plan, I think it would go up $650 million instead of go up $3 billion. Now, what are some of the practical day-to-day things that Minnesotans who avail themselves of those services will have to do without if you reduce the rate of growth by that much?
Well, Eric, first off, if you're increasing the budget, what makes you believe that you're going to decrease the services? Now, some can argue that, well, the costs are going up, etc., but our goal, our object should be making sure we contain costs. This is the problem, is that health and human services is the one area of government. It's one of the 2 fastest growing and largest pieces of our general fund budget. It's scheduled itself, that area of government, it's scheduled itself for a 32% increase in just the next 2 years. years. You're right. We increased
going up.
Here's the thing, though. This is the problem. We have expanded it by $650 million, and what we're hoping to do with the legislature, if we're in the office, if Minnesota elects us, is start to work at reforming the programs that we've got, so you still deliver the services, but you do it at a much less expensive and cost-efficient
And what does it mean by
manner.
reforming services? Because most of these services are for elderly and disabled people, and those numbers keep growing.
Kathy, I appreciate it, but I'll give you an example. It's a bill that I authored that's still in the legislature. It would take a program like Minnesota Care that's intended to be a safety net for somebody who is out of employment and they need help. They need health insurance. Right now, they take you into turnkey government-run health insurance program. We have proposed turning that into a subsidy program where somebody would come and qualify for the same level of benefit, but now can take a private health care premium insurance voucher down to their local insurance broker.
That's a smaller amount of money.
No, it's not.
It's
if
a
I
tiny,
can finish.
It's a tiny fraction of the budget, though, Minnesota Care.
$250 to $500 million every 2 years just for that one program, and that's, you asked me to give you an example. I got one more, Eric. 32%. People need to understand, these two want to grow it to $12 billion in the next 2 years. We've kept it just under $10 billion, and that's still an increase. Here's the problem. If it grows at 32% for each of the next 2 or 6 years, it'll eat up the entire budget within 10 years. You got to be responsible now.
Let me just correct one thing. Minnesota Care wasn't designed initially for people out of work. It was designed actually for the working poor, and now it has been transformed into a program that isn't working for anybody. So I think we do need to fix Minnesota Care, but we need to do it in a way that provides good coverage for people at an affordable level. But let me give you the real area where we need to save money. And again, it's going to come from reform, not just by taxing and adding to the status quo or cutting spending and eliminating some of the status quo. Older adult services that you mentioned. Look at the challenge we have. Right now it costs about $5,000 a month to put a person in a nursing home. 2/3 of that is paid by public funds on average. You know, we need to have services that keep people in their homes, aging in place for as long as possible, and we need to start to create a system in which people can save for their own older adult
like
care.
A 529
A 529 plan, exactly, where it would have the flexibility. They could use it for the dollars, they could buy insurance, those kinds of things. And we have more community-based services.
Do you think that's going to really save that much money?
Not initially. It's going to cost money. It's going to cost more money initially, but look at the savings down the road, and that's what we need to be focused on. If we just focus on yesterday's problems, how do you cut spending? How do you keep all of those programs in place by raising taxes? We never get to the long-term innovations. What we ought to be focused on is what's the outcome? The outcome is we ought to provide the best quality care to all older adults in their homes at their own cost when possible. The only way you get there is by funding a transition right now.
Well, Senator, you're going to have to reduce human service spending?
Absolutely. We need to look for the reforms, and my excellent running mate, State Senator Yvonne Pretner-Solon, was one of the leaders in the Minnesota legislature in initiating just what Mr. Horner and I would agree with him said, is reducing the need for long-term care in nursing homes and shifting it to in-home care, and they've reduced the percent of long-term dollars if going to nursing homes from 88% down to about 72% in the last few years. So those initiatives have already been undertaken, and yes, they absolutely need to be continued. The other thing we need to do in terms of health care, and Mr. Horner, I believe, and I agree on this, would sign the early opt-in for Medicaid on day one.
Yes.
And that would bring for $188 million net investment by the state of Minnesota over 3 years, which is already provided by the governor and the legislature in the next biennium, of $1.4 billion in federal money. And that's important, not only providing health care to Minnesotans, but also strengthening the financial base of our hospitals across the state so they can provide better health care for everybody.
Where would you cut the human services budget? You've been kind of quiet about this. You keep saying that, well, I'll wait, if I'm elected, I'll wait till next year.
Well, I think we do need to shift the funding from the long-term care in residential to in-home services, and that is going to mean we need to make more investments in the home services. Most seniors want to stay in their home. My father wants to be in his home. He's able to afford the support services to do so. We need to enable people to be able to stay at home. At Meals on Wheels, the ways in which people can have electronic devices that alert their loved ones if they have an accident at home, the various ways that we can invest in the services and expand those that outreach to people who want to stay in their homes and live their lives there and still be part of a community.
You have elderly parents.
No.
They would probably disagree with
You're not
that.
going out to them on TV.
I don't think my parents will tell you that they're elderly. My parents are 71 and 70. And I just have to go back to this. It's about funding your priorities, Cathy. Our priorities should be children. Our priorities should be our seniors, our veterans, our disabled. You fund your priorities. The reforms have to come in that you can't keep funding able-bodied adults. You got to look at what you're providing. And we put out the only number that says this is what we do within, and again, it's $650 million more, as Eric pointed out. We're not coming in to slash and burn. We're just saying that government has to live within the 7 to 8% in new revenue that it has, and this is what we would propose to do with health and human
But the
services.
Minnesota Care part of that is just a tiny fraction, though, of the overall budget.
Almost 90% of the recipients are the elderly and children and those with disabilities.
Again,
I mean, we're talking about people here. You know, you said earlier government itself. This is about people. This is about people who get personal care attendants, but people who are able to stay at home, those who need to be in nursing homes, who are literally kept alive through that kind of care. These are about people, and we do have a growing, aging population. So when you talk about the budget as though this is something about itself, this is about the real Minnesotans who need these services.
And you know what, Senator? You're absolutely right. And that's why I put out a budget that you can actually support. I'm not making promises to people out there that you can't keep. You're out telling people everything you're going to do for them. You're going to give them all kinds of new spending in K-12 education and health care, everywhere. You're making just politics.
I said I have to balance.
Now they're goals.
You know, you're a legislator.
Now they're
you have to balance the budget.
Look,
we know that.
You've been running for years. I've been on the outside watching. People are tired, I think, of politicians who come out and say, we're going to do this for you, we're going to do that for you. Now you call them goals. What are they? Are they budgets or are they goals?
You run for more public offices than I have.
Yeah, at a local level where you don't make a career out of it.
Those are public offices.
The problem is, it's these kinds of discussions that have created a $6 billion shortfall.
Well,
if the legislature this year had fixed a $3 billion shortfall and had done it honestly, we wouldn't have a $6 billion shortfall. How do you get there if you keep having these discussions? We've got to have better conversations, better answers, better innovations.
Somebody in the next room wanted to know this. I was on Twitter or Facebook. You don't really have any natural allies in the legislature. No, if you're elected,
I've got 5 million natural allies. I mean, that's what I've done in my community service career and my professional career.
If you're elected governor, who will be your allies in the legislature? That happened to Jesse Ventura. He initially kind of went above lawmakers for a while, and then it kind of crashed and burned later on.
But why? Well, why? I mean,
you tell me.
Jesse Ventura had a very successful first couple of years. He had a great cabinet. He had the mandate that comes from electing an independent, where Democrats and Republicans say, all right, the voters are telling us it's time to work together. Look, Senator Dayton doesn't have a handful of Democratic votes, as he acknowledged, for his own tax plan. Representative Emmer couldn't get support within the Republican caucus. Take the sales tax that they too like to beat up on. Several Democrats that I've mentioned by name, the business-led tax reform commission appointed by Governor Pawlenty came to the same conclusion. And you know why? Because people understand this has to be about the future. It's got to be about getting rid of that gridlock. And that's why every newspaper in the state, with one exception, that has endorsed me. And they've all said, I'm the only one who can break the gridlock.
Do you two other fellows feel left out about these newspaper endorsements? Because Mr. Horner has received the lion's share. What happened to you two?
Well, the only endorsement that really matters is the endorsement of the people of Minnesota next Tuesday. That's the endorsement that I'm seeking. And, the polls show that Representative Emmer and I have, so far, the endorsement of the overwhelming majority of Minnesotans. So, there's something about, and we have different views, there's a resonance out there with people who are making their own decisions, as they should. And, one poll showed that the people in the state who were polled, 60% of them preferred my tax proposal, 40% preferred the other two combined, because they recognize, unlike what Mr. Horner said, that the middle class has not been getting a free ride in taxes. The property taxes have gone up.
I don't know where that comes from, that the 40%. You know what? Most people, hardworking families and businesses in this state, Mark, want us to lower taxes so they can start to create new opportunities. When it comes to the newspaper endorsements, I think in my case, it was very hard for the folks that I sat down with to get their arms around. Can government really get efficient and provide services without having to raise taxes? Can it do it? And they don't. They're having trouble. I had one person at the Star Tribune asked me, well, how are you going to get multinational businesses to start expanding in this state? Is it just lowering the corporate income tax by a point or two in the next 2 years and streamlining regulation? The problem is, Cathy, we've been doing it this way for decades.
And you want to do it different.
Let's move on.
With
it. But it's for exactly that point that the newspapers did endorse me. I answered those same questions. I gave them the innovations. I gave them the answers. That's exactly why they did endorse me, because because they could see the innovation, they could see the change, they could see breaking free of the gridlock and doing things differently in education, healthcare, tax reform, spending.
I'm going to do a change of pace question. Now, you all have seen our debates before. We kind of do these little things and yes or no questions. They're kind of a fun thing. Do you support wine sales in grocery stores? Yes or no? Do you? Okay. Wine sales in grocery stores? No. Wine sales in grocery stores. Okay.
Should Coach Childress start Brett Favre on Sunday?
Let's start at that end.
What do you think?
Yes.
He should start it.
Absolutely.
Whoever best for the team.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And we're going to get something done. No, they ought to go to Tavares Jackson, presuming that his ankle is still as bad as it appeared to be this week.
Okay.
I actually have a pretty good policy question here. Should the ban on construction of new nuclear plants in Minnesota be lifted?
I think the moratorium ought to be lifted. That doesn't mean we ought to go to more construction, but we have serious waste issues that we have to talk about.
Okay.
The moratorium has pushed those issues, the storage issues, off the table.
No, I spent 6 years in the U.S. Senate recognizing there's no resolution today for the nuclear waste all over the country until we've resolved that. I would not support lifting the moratorium.
Okay. And Representative Emmer?
Yes. We've got a company in Arden Hills, Minnesota that's building nuclear power plants all over the world. It's not the 70s any longer. This is an option that should absolutely be looked at in Minnesota with every other available option when it comes to affordable and efficient energy to move our economy forward.
You mentioned the Vikings. There was a Star Tribune poll out this week. 75% of the poll respondents oppose state funding for a Viking stadium. You all support a Viking stadium. How do you deal with taking a stand on something that is against popular opinion?
Well, I support a People of Minnesota stadium to build a stadium that benefits this state economically, and I'd look at it the same way as I did when I was Commissioner of Economic Development.
It's more of a philosophical question. Okay, it's more of a philosophical question. How do you deal with taking a stand on something, even if it's goes against popular opinion?
I thought former Governor Arnie Carlson made an excellent observation regarding the stadium. You have to sell people the vision of what it is. It's not only about 11 Viking games a year. It's about a stadium that attracts concerts and rollerblading in the evenings and national conventions and generates the economic activity and is not paid for out of the general fund. So the economic benefits of building it, 8,000 people working for 3 years, the taxes they pay, the revenues the contractors, subcontractors pay, all the economic advantages to the people of Minnesota are greater than any public costs.
I use the Viking Stadium as an example, Representative Emmer, but I'm thinking just in more of a philosophical sense here. If you're onto an issue that you really believe in, do you ever back down?
Well, I think it's not a matter of backing down. You have to have an open mind and be willing to learn. I mean, maybe you're wrong about something, but as long as you have your facts straight, as long as you understand, like, I will tell you, no, I don't back down on this. These two gentlemen believe we should raise taxes, billions of dollars of new taxes. It's going to drive away jobs. I believe the government should live within that 7 to 8% in new revenue that we're projected to have, and we got to do things to grow jobs. I won't back down on that. I won't back down on that.
Okay.
I think people just get so tired of politicians who say, oh, yes, we support the Viking Stadium, but then we're going to talk about a people stadium. It's a Viking stadium. We need to keep the Vikings. We need to keep the NFL. That is an example of leadership, to be willing to take on a tough issue and to use a campaign the way a campaign ought to, against public opinion, because I do believe that in the long run, it's the right thing for Minnesota. It's the right thing. And I've designed a plan where taxpayers who don't want to pay for a Viking stadium don't have to pay for it. We won't take it out of general revenue, and the Vikings still have said it's the most viable plan. I think that's the leadership we need, is when you have a governor who's willing to take on interest groups, who's willing to take on these tough issues and go out and engage the public. That's my job as governor, is to put a plan out there and then to win public support. I think I'm the only one who can do that.
Great. Good place to take a little break. We're going to check back in with Mary Lahammer and Rachel Stassen-Berger. How's it going in there?
Well, Twitter is hopping online. In this room, we're getting a lot of reaction. Just a survey, like we said, we had a lot of Jesse Ventura voters and people who voted Democratic, Independent, Republican, all over the map in previous years. A couple of the people who are considering Horner like what they're hearing tonight, and we're hearing they are leaning more towards Horner. Our Emmer person is still solid. From Emmer, he'd like to hear more specifics. Our Dayton guy says he's doing just fine still with Dayton. We've had a couple of good reactions to some lines.
And the folks here and online want to know some issues that they haven't really talked about. We'd like to hear a little bit more about legalizing marijuana in this room. a little bit more about an alternative track for teacher licensure, particularly from Dayton, who has the teachers union endorsement. And another question about social issues. How do they rank, given that we're having such trouble in our state budget and in the economy? And if the candidates feel like answering those, that'd be helpful for this room.
And the two biggest reactions so far in this room, when Emmer made the comment about his not-so-elderly parents, that got a big laugh. And then when Dayton said the only endorsement that matters is the endorsement of the people, there was a collective "aww"
and
in the
it was
room.
sarcastic.
Sarcastic.
So
yes.
I think what we're hearing, at least from this room, if it's representative, the candidates aren't really pulling the wool over voters' eyes very much. Might want to be careful about that.
It's a smart group. And on Twitter, we have a lot of good comments coming from people, again, who want more specifics and looking for other things. They like the Favre question. That's gotten a lot of traction. We can see there. Some other comments about one candidate being bullheaded, some other comments. So keep it going. Send us your questions, feedback, ideas, Twitter, Facebook, and we'll check in later.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
And I'm at Rachel SB, Mary's.
I'm Lahammer, and back to the debate.
Thank you.
Times more people read the sport page, the front page.
Thanks, you two. And you know what? We're in the home stretch right now. Do you believe it? After all this time is gone, we're kind of getting to the end of the debate here. Actually, one of those individuals wanted to know about more social issues. Now, I know you all haven't really talked about social issues that much during this campaign, but there are people who really want to know where you stand on various issues. And I'm going to start with Senator Dayton first. The Minnesota Family Council says if Dayton wins, it means abortions and condoms any and everywhere. Really?
Absolutely not. I support the Roe v. Wade decision that says that, abortion in the first, second trimesters is a woman's decision. The third trimester is something that, government can have a voice in, although I believe that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, and I believe that those should be decisions made medically by physicians and with a woman and her faith.
There's the parental notification law in Minnesota requires that both parents be told of a girl's decision 48 hours before she gets an abortion. On the federal level, you voted no on notifying parents of minors who get out-of-state abortions. Why did you do that?
No, I don't believe I voted. I voted about the ability to transport minors, for them to transport themselves across state lines, but I don't recall that one at all. My position is that I believe that parents should be notified. I'm a parent myself. My sons are grown up now, but I believe that parents should have a right to be notified of a minor's decision with the ability for a court to be to intervene in a case where its notification would threaten the physical or emotional well-being of the minor.
And you are endorsed by Planned Parenthood. Representative Emmer, do you expect to introduce any abortion-related bills during your tenure if you are elected governor?
You know what, Cathy, we had this conversation when I was here back in August. I have a very clear position on these issues.
You're endorsed by the MCCL.
Sure, but my campaign is all about getting government back in proper...
I understand that, but there are people who vote on abortion issues.
Well, that's great.
They go and they are supportive. They want to know who they're voting for.
That's great. And like I said, I've got a history. I've got a record on those issues. It's clear. But this campaign is about the economy and jobs. That's what we have to do for the state of Minnesota going forward. And I'm going to stick to it.
So are you saying this is not an important issue then?
I'm sure it's important to many people.
Because you co-sponsored 5 anti-abortion related bills last session. So it must be important to you.
It's important to many people. But again, this is about the economy and jobs. We've got to get people working again in the state of Minnesota.
28 other debates, we talked about the economy and jobs. We're asking about social issues.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you this one more time. Do you expect to introduce any abortion-related bills during your tenure?
Kathy, here's the thing. Let's stick to the issues that unify us. This is an issue that divides us. I think it's time that we be unified. And the one thing that's going to unify us is getting our economy moving again, getting Minnesotans good quality jobs and getting them working again.
Okay.
Yeah, let's stick with that.
So you're not going to go answer the question. All right. Hi, Tom.
Well, I don't think anybody disagrees that we have to create jobs, we have to balance the budget, we have to move the economy forward. But I do think that we also have an obligation to talk about issues that are important to people, that they do care about. And so my position is I wouldn't change the status quo on abortion laws in Minnesota. But I think it's not enough. I think a leader has to go beyond that. You can't just tout platitudes, Senator, and I'm not sure why Representative Emmer doesn't answer the question. So here's where I would put my political capital, and it gets back to how do I move things forward with Democrats and Republicans? By going out to the public. And I think where the public agrees is that we ought to reduce the need for abortion. And you get there by making sure that women have access to health care, including contraceptive care, by good sex education. I was disappointed that Governor Pawlenty turned down the federal grant. I think there are some good programs out there, including some good abstinence-based programs. And I think you fund adoption services. And let's focus on moving the state forward, not just on these nice platitudes. And where we can move the state forward is good public policy that reduces the need for abortion.
Senator, when the Minneapolis Police Union endorsed you, one of the reasons was they said you're a gun guy. What was that all about?
Well, I'm not sure what they're referring to there. I do own firearms. I went pheasant hunting in Montevideo last weekend, and I've also supported the police and peace officers when they, in Washington, I'm getting smeared for it now by the NRA around the state, but so, I mean, I'm putting an ammunition company out of business, bankrupting them, which is simply untrue. I voted at the request of the police chiefs and the police officers associations to ban the so-called cop killer bullets. And as I asked a couple hundred people at Game Fair, sportsmen and women, hunters, you know, who of you own cop killer bullets? And no one raised their hand. So I think it's, you know, I mean, I support the Second Amendment. Absolutely. I support the right of law-abiding citizens to bear arms, and as I said, I'm a gun owner myself.
Are you in favor of gun licensing and registration?
I support the Minnesota laws that exist today.
Okay. Representative Emmer, excuse me, there are law-abiding gun owners out there. How do you keep handguns out of the wrong hands?
Well, first off, you don't go at it with the assumption that everybody who owns a handgun is in the wrong hands. And Senator, you know, when you have an F rating from the NRA, I don't think it came from one vote. I think it came from many different votes at the federal level. You know what? I believe in gun ownership. I believe in Second Amendment rights. Frankly, I don't believe that you need to have state laws. We have a U.S. Constitution that gives us that right. But as long as we have those state laws, we should enforce them as they exist.
And Tom Horner.
Well, I agree. I think we ought to enforce the laws that exist, and I would support the Minnesota laws as they exist right now.
So gun registration.
I would support the Minnesota laws.
Okay.
Right.
How about there's been a proposal to reduce some sentences on low-level drug offenders as a way to perhaps reduce recidivism and ease the expense of prison expenses, corrections expenses in Minnesota? Is there some review of sentencing policy that might be in order?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we do have to take a look at that, and I think we have to be thoughtful about it. But I think if we're just going to reduce the sentencing, that's the short-sighted answer. I think we have to do it in the context of what next, what then? How do we make sure that these people have the opportunity to get the job training skills that they need? How do we grow the economy so that the jobs are available? How do we make sure that we're investing up front in the kinds of programs that help us prevent the imprisonment in the first place? And I think that goes back to things like early childhood education, making sure we have good K-12 schools, making sure we're intervening with kids, making sure that we do have some opportunities for kids after school during the summer. These don't all have to be government programs. There are good private sector, nonprofit programs out there. It's government's role, I think, to set a good vision and in some cases good policy. And we ought to take a look and keep challenging ourselves to ask whether or not we still are doing best by all of our citizens.
Representative Emmer, what do you think about a review of sentences to see if maybe some of the low-level drug crimes not be as severely sentenced?
Well, here's the overriding concern. This is about public safety, and it's about rehabilitation. The problem that I think we're having all across this country, which we should be very careful with, is who defines what as a low-level offense, and what are we talking about in terms of the sentencing. I agree. We should review all sentences all the time to make sure that we are accomplishing our goals when it comes to public safety and rehabilitation of the people that have violated the laws and are being released back into society. But the thing that I disagree with vehemently is where states are starting to change laws and ignore existing laws because of budget cuts. You actually have to get back to, once again, doing what I've been a broken record about. You got to reform government. You got to make it more efficient. You got to start growing jobs again, because it's those growing jobs in the private sector that pay for the things that we expect government government to provide, one of which is our public safety, and probably the most important obligation.
I think well, public safety absolutely should be the paramount concern. But I believe you're referring to the alternative sentencing courts for returning veterans, and it's recognized that the returning Iraq and Afghan war veterans have been under enormously stressful conditions, as I witnessed a few times I was over there, deserve a consideration if they're acting based on serious emotional after effects of those experiences, or under the influence of chemicals based in part on that. And I think those kinds of alternative sentencing approaches need to be looked at and see if they're effective or not. I visited a Faribault medium security prison a couple months ago, and the warden said that 95% of the 2,000 men who are incarcerated there, 95% of them are committed for either crimes under the influence of drugs or to raise money to support those habits. So from a public expense standpoint, if we can look at ways we can intervene in advance and prevent those kinds of crimes from being committed against society, then we should look to do so.
Representative Emmer brought up jobs again, growing jobs, and I'm curious about this. I'm going to kind of take a bit of a turn here. When you talk to people and you interview them about the recession, and many people are really angry about losing jobs to outsourcing, jobs going overseas, and there have been efforts on the federal level to curtail outsourcing. Would you, as Governor Dayton, be willing to look at some kind of state law to curtail Minnesota jobs from going overseas?
Well, I don't think we can turn back the hands of time. And I've been to China 6 times this decade, and I've seen some of those 1.3 billion people willing to work and work very hard for 60, 70 cents an hour jobs that used to be here. What we need to do is replace those jobs with the jobs of the future, and that's where an education system is so vitally important. Well-educated people become the entrepreneurs that start successful businesses, and then they find other well-educated people to be the employees of those businesses. And the studies have shown, the recent Kaufman report looks at where people locate these startup companies, and they are in areas like Minneapolis and St. Paul, because we do have, we need to continue an education system. One of the reasons that losing our public infrastructure and our transportation quality is so detrimental is because those are also key decisions. So I think we need to look to the future.
So you wouldn't even look at sanctions? The horse is out of the barn.
I mean, it's really more of a federal tax issue. We should not, and Congress should not be providing tax incentives or advantages for companies that shift jobs overseas. But as a practical matter, I don't think you can put up rigid barriers any longer in this global economy.
Tom Emmer, what do you think about outsourcing?
I would look at laws and policies. It's not just a Minnesota problem. This is an American problem. It's about being competitive, not only in this country, but in the world. And our tax policies and our regulatory burdens that we've created in the state of Minnesota and the United States of America have frankly made us less than competitive. So I've already proposed you immediately have to reduce the corporate franchise tax in the state of Minnesota. Why? When you combine Minnesota's corporate franchise tax, which is 9.8%, some call it the corporate income tax. When you combine that 9.8% with the federal corporate tax, we have the third highest in the world. You reduce it by a couple of points over the next 2 years, you free up resources for our businesses to start making capital purchases and to start hiring people again. Same with small businesses. We would propose a 10% exclusion on pass-through income. A lot of people don't understand, Senator, that small businesses identified as S corporations, LLCs, those people don't file corporate tax returns. They file individual tax returns. What we're proposing is a 10% exclusion on gross earnings, which will put about $160 million into their hands over the next 2 years to start hiring and growing business. The key, Cathy, is to make sure that Minnesota's business environment, tax environment, and the regulatory burdens make it competitive for them to produce in Minnesota again.
Would you do anything to deal with outsourcing at all?
Yeah,
people are so upset about that.
Absolutely. And it's not just a question of budget issues or tax issues. It's a much more complicated issue, as so many of these things are, where we lose the nuance in this political posturing. One of the real challenges we face is talk to our universities today and how many fewer students are going into the courses in IT infrastructure, in really understanding what we need to design the information technology of the future, because that's part of what we're exporting. We're losing that intellectual capital. And so is it cheaper for some of our companies to export that and be more competitive? Absolutely, in the short term. We need to look longer term. And so one of the things we ought to do is look at how do we incent Minnesota companies to keep that talent here. Because we do have to acknowledge the cost, but we better be developing that skill level. We can't export our intellectual capital, and that's exactly what we're doing. That's the short-sightedness that we're getting out of policies that just look in the rearview mirror.
You got
I agree with that, because, and I visited a solar company just the other day here in the Twin Cities that is having the panels manufactured in China because of the lower costs, but the intellectual effort, the new technology, and the innovation is what's being applied here, and that's the key to our future success. That's why our education system is so vitally important.
Well, why should we be happy that they're manufacturing the solar panels in China? We should have both here.
Well,
that's what we have to
because
create.
they're being paid 60, 70 cents an hour.
To get there, look at, I'll give you a great example. There's a terrific company in the Twin Cities called Recon Robotics. Came out of engineering at the University of Minnesota. Programs that likely would be cut and wouldn't exist. Basic research. It is a company that is based in Minnesota. It's being manufactured in Winona. It's going to create a whole new industry around nanorobotics. That's where we need to be investing. That comes from investing in higher education, in research, in the future.
I want to ask kind of a personality question to end the debate tonight. You get up one morning and you look in the mirror and you say, I should be governor. Is that great self-confidence, or great ego, or great confidence in your own abilities? What's going on in your thought process to say that?
If you're asking me, Eric, I don't think it happens that way. I don't think you get up one day and say that this is the job that I should be doing. I think it happens because of timing, where you are at a certain point in time in your life, and then encouragement that you get from people that you trust, which is what happened to me. Then you get into the process, which I did almost 16 months ago now, and as you go through the process, you realize, you know what? I am prepared to do this job. And God willing, the good people of the state of Minnesota will give us the opportunity to do the job, because we do offer something different than my colleagues. We offer this experience from outside of government, trying to raise a big family under the burdens created by government, higher taxes, more regulation, trying to run a small business, understanding what it's like to meet a payroll in a small business. I think it's time for people like us to take a leadership role and ownership in our future.
What is it about you when you look in the mirror and say, I can do this job?
Well, it comes from a conviction that Minnesota's headed in the wrong direction, and then they go out in the process. I've had 114 community meetings, and I've been all over the state, as I have for the last 35 years, and to connect with people in their lives and find out, what's happening, and to have people, crying because they've lost their jobs, or because a private company has cut their pensions, or go into a classrooms and see a teacher with 35 children in a 5th grade classroom in Rochester, and realize that, I believe I can offer a better direction to Minnesota that's going to help us realize the future that we want for our state, and that reconnects with the greatness of our citizens and with policies that up until now have failed them, and that education is the key, and it's half of our budget, and the investment we make in education is going to be crucial to determining the future and the jobs that people are going to want to have and can be successful then in raising families with in the future.
You come at this without previous electoral experience.
Right, and isn't that a great asset? So for me, it really was about hope. It hasn't been a lifetime spent in government or running for office as Senator Dayton, or half of an adult career as Representative Emmer. I've spent my career in community service and in business. I think those are the assets that Minnesota need. But I really approached it when I was talking with my wife Libby about hope, about what the future ought to hold. How we make this great state a place where our 3 kids can enjoy professional success, but also can enjoy civic success. And my trust in Minnesotans that this is a year in which they have to get beyond voting out of fear. They can't vote against somebody. My pitch to them is, a vote for Horner is a vote for Horner. Vote for the future. Vote for innovation. Vote for moving forward.
Thank all you candidates for being so patient with the electorate over the past few months. How many debates has it been?
This is 29. Number 30 is coming up.
All right. Well, good luck on Tuesday. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for joining us tonight. Special thanks to our citizens and Mary and Rachel, the rest of the colleagues at the Star Tribune. Election Day is Tuesday, and we want you to join our TPT election night coverage online on Twitter and Facebook. Mary and I will be reporting from candidate headquarters, and we want you to join the conversation. Here's how you do that. On Twitter, we'll be using the hashtag of TPT Vote. That's TPT Vote, or you can also go to our website on election night. We have have a special page for you there, and that is tpt.org/social. And you can join the conversation there as well. That website again is tpt.org/social.